Okay, multiplying and dividing real numbers. This is the only thing about this section that's hard, and it's just something you got to remember. The product of two numbers with the same sign is positive. The product of two numbers with different signs is negative. So two positives multiplied together obviously is going to be a positive answer. Two negatives multiplied together, those cancel each other out and also equal a positive. Okay, two products with different signs equal a negative, because nothing is going to cancel out. So, what is 8 times negative 5? Is that going to be a positive or a negative answer? Negative, and it's going to be 40. It's negative because that negative on that 5 doesn't have another number or another negative to cancel with. Okay? 9 times 6. What is that? 54. Remember, 9 times anything will end up being something that adds up to 9. 5 plus 4 is 9. Negative 3 times negative 4. Those negatives pair up and cancel each other out, so we get a positive 12.
Negative 42.
And the last one is a negative because there's nothing to cancel out, and then 42. Okay, let's do it with three numbers then. What is our answer here? This one's a little different. Yes, 0. We don't have a negative 0, so it's just 0. Okay? Next one. Is our answer positive or negative?
Negative 24.
Negative, because these two negatives cancel each other out, which means there's one left over to make our answer negative. So that's 6 times negative 4 gives me the negative 24, as you said. Okay, on the next one, what do you think the first thing we should do is?
44.
What would I have you do even before that?
Plus
Yeah, plus negative. Chunka dunka. Okay? We want to do that because we don't like minus. Again, you can get away with doing it without doing that. It's just my process. It's the way that prevents the most mistakes. That's why I do it that way. Okay? So now we can multiply because PEMDAS tells us to do that. So those negatives cancel and those negatives cancels.
54.
Yep, 44 plus 10, 54. Okay, positive or negative answer on number 8?
Positive.
Positive, because these two cancel. So then that's just 6 times 4 is 24.
Fractions and decimals.
Okay, so anything on these first two slides has potential to be on your non-calculator portion. Okay, because if I gave you this on your calculator portion, you could just type it in and not have to know that a negative times a negative equals a positive. So you need to know that. Anything on this would be on your calculator portion. I could probably give you these fraction ones on your non-calc, because you should be able to do that without a calculator. Yeah, you can. You just need to multiply.
Fraction.
Yeah, the decimal's hard. Okay, the decimal. Should I get negative or positive? Negative, because there's only one negative and 0.06.
Could you have done that in
No. Yeah, maybe. Close. Okay, fractions, let's rewrite it. Negative 7 over 10. Okay, do we need a common denominator? Yes or no?
No.
No, why don't we need a common denominator?
Because you cancel out from the sideways, cross and over, and then you get 7 over 15.
Okay, so we don't need a common denominator because we're multiplying. So when we're multiplying, like he said, we're just going to cross out the stuff that can be simplified and then just multiply straight across. So that's negative 7 over 15. Okay, last one, let's rewrite it. 4 over 5, negative, multiplied by negative 20. What would I have you do before you start this? Put it over 1. We want it as a fraction. Here 1, and here 4. So that's just negative 4 times a negative 4.
Negative 16.
Negative 16 over 1, which is just negative 16. Please do not put an answer over 1. Please simplify it as much as you can.
Why would it be negative?
Yeah.
Sorry, that is positive. Good catch.
That was me.
Did you say that? Is that why I wrote it? Dang it. Come on. Come on. So, you're right. It is positive because there's a negative times a negative.
Brother? You
What?
know that's funny.
What'd you say?
What do you mean, bro?
Mm-mm. What is it? Okay, so those two negatives equal a positive.
I watch them all day today on Twitch. I'm joking.
Alright, next slide. I want you to do all 4 of these, but do all 4 of these with a calculator. Type it in exactly as you see it.
What do you mean, brother?
Use a calculator on this. Type it in exactly as you see it. If it's parentheses, put parentheses. If it's not parentheses, don't put parentheses. What is the answer to number 1?
Negative 8.
Negative 8. Okay, what's the answer for number 2?
Negative 8.
Okay, what's the answer for number 3?
9.
Positive 9. Answer for number 4.
Negative 9.
Okay, so let's try and figure out why these look different. Why are these both negatives and then one of this is positive?
3 and 4 are odd numbers, so it makes a difference.
No, but keep thinking that
Here,
same thing. Try
we'll
to figure
do
out a
it.
different reason.
Because one is cubed and one is squared.
Okay, so these are odd.
Because
Exponents.
2 negatives equals a positive or something like that.
Right? So this negative times itself equals a positive.
But 3 negatives.
So why is this
So
not
that's-
positive though? That's what we're going to figure out.
Because there's no parentheses.
Okay, so what does the parentheses tell us to do according to PEMDAS? We talked about that last time.
Parentheses are first.
Parentheses are first. So that means what comes after parentheses?
Exponents.
Exponents. So what that means is we have to do the exponents before we even do the negative. So that negative is not even there. We do this squared and then add a negative on. This one, the parentheses are there, so we did the negative first because of PEMDAS. Then we squared it. So let me write it down and show you exactly what is happening. Negative 3 times negative 3. Okay? So that's what number 3 is. Look at number 3. Negative 3 times negative 3. That's why that ends up being a positive 9. But number 4 is negative 3 times 3. That's why that ends up being a negative 9. Okay, because that negative is not attached to it. So it just stays out front until we're done doing what we're supposed to do. Okay, we have to do exponents and then tie that negative back on. So if there's no parentheses, it's going to be negative because you're just going to throw a negative on the end. Okay? So let's try this. Here's another one where I get you to stand on your chairs.
Yes.
Okay?
I solved these.
So, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think this is positive or negative? Number 1, stand up if you think it's negative. You can go on your chair if you want.
Can I go on the table?
No, not yet. Okay, that is negative. Why is it negative? Why is that negative?
The exponent is odd.
Because the exponent is odd and what?
And because it's in parentheses.
Because we have parentheses. So the exponent's odd and we have parentheses. So this thing is going to be listed 5 times. 4 of those are going to cancel each other out, which means the 5th one keeps it to the negative. Okay? Sit down if you think the next one's positive. Stand up if you think it's negative. Okay, why is that one positive?
Because it's 14 and we can go into 2, so
So we're going to have 7 pairs in there. Everything's going to pair up with 1 and everything's going to cancel out. Okay, next one, positive or negative. Ooh.
Come here, boy.
There's no parentheses, so what are we going to do?
Yeah, come here, boy. Is it quick? 15 times 15, if I know what that was. 225.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
225.
and then you have to put a negative on the side.
So remember, if this negative's outside of it, that means just make the answer negative. So it doesn't matter what's happening over here, the answer is going to be negative. Because you're going to add that negative on in the end no matter what.
Kaden, did you know this?
No. Mr. Maggie didn't teach us that.
Learned it yesterday. You call him Mr. Maggie? Is it kind of like Cinder Maggie?
Okay, what about number 4? Positive or negative? Nobody's moving?
Wait, what is it?
Number 4? Positive or
Oh,
negative?
no, I'm saying. I don't know what you mean.
Okay, yes, negative. Because again, everything's going to cancel out except for that last 7th one. Okay, what about number 5? Still nobody moving? I don't know, that's a really big number.
Yeah, but it has a 3 on the end.
Okay, so it's a really big odd number, so it still is negative. Doesn't matter how big it is.
I'm going to solve that real quick.
Number 6.
Sometimes this is math error.
Yeah, your calculator can't handle it.
Hey, how do you know? My calculator's a TI-34 multi-view. It looks at it from...
Okay, number 6, positive or negative, which one?
It looks... Oh, that's... That. Oh, no, stand up because it's not in parentheses.
It's not in parentheses, so no matter what happens, it's going to be negative. No matter what happens, because you're going to add that negative at the end.
Mike overflow error.
Same thing with this. No matter what happens, if it says 1, I don't care. If it says 4,768, I don't care, because you're going to just add a negative at the end. All right, take a seat, please.
Wait, that's a quick, what do you mean, brother?
It says math here.
Mine just read
Mine said
Okay, so if you look at this, there is only one positive. That's because for it to be positive, it has to be in parentheses and even.
Yeah, and
Okay?
that doesn't happen.
Any other situation ends up being negative. In parentheses and even. Okay? Alright, last slide. Simplify these. What would be my first thing that I would want you to do on this one?
Parentheses.
What would I want you to do before that? What do we not like? We don't like minus.
Signs. Rewrite.
Yep, we don't like minus. So let's change these. Chunka Dunka and Chunka Chunka. Both of them. They changed it because they said this one's Chunka Dunka because it's different, and this is Chunka Chunka because it's the same.
Think about it.
I like Chunka Chunka.
We still have a chunky chunka.
Yeah, but why did it make it more complicated like if you teach other things?
Because we don't like that.
They're the only class that did it. The other classes still do Chunka Chunka. Alright, next we multiply. Multiply is 88 plus negative 4 over negative 5, because we can combine those. On the top, that ends up being 84 over negative 5. Okay, that is a correct answer, but that is not the way that most people would write that.
They would write like something like...
I would say Chunka Chunka.
Most people will write either the negative outside or the negative on the top. Most people in most math classes don't like the look of this one. We don't like negatives on the bottom. It is still correct. 100% exact same thing. So yeah, this is just like math etiquette. You know? Like you're supposed to do it one way, but it's not incorrect. Okay, show me the answer to the last one, and then you have your break.
Oh, my boy.
Show me the answer to the last one, and then you have your break. I don't think. Okay, so first thing I would do on this last problem. First thing I would do is Chunkadunka. Then we will do exponents first. Okay, very common error is to multiply that 3 times negative 2. Do not do that. That 3 stays where it is. Negative 2 cubed is a negative 8 plus negative 9 over, we can go ahead and simplify the bottom to a negative 3. Multiply and then combine like terms, so negative 24 plus negative 9 over negative 3. That is negative 33 over negative 3. A negative divided by a negative does equal a positive 11. Okay, is there anything you need me to go back to right now? Properties of real numbers. There's a couple properties we're going to talk about. The commutative property, associative property, distributive property, identity property, and we're actually not going to talk about the inverse property on this one. So we cut that out. Commutative property is what we're going to talk about first. The commutative property, what does it mean to commute somewhere?
To like go there?
To go, to move. So the commutative property is just moving the stuff around. That's all it means. The order in which they are added or multiplied does not change their sum or product. Okay, so if I took these two and I moved them to different locations, and you add them, it's still the same thing. What's 3 plus 5?
21.
8. What is 5 plus 3?
8.
So it doesn't matter the order, their answer is going to be the same. So the commutative property, moving them, does not matter. Okay, but that only applies with multiplication and addition. That's the commutative property. So if I ask you on your test to use the commutative property, and you see this, I have people every year come up to me and say, how am I supposed to solve for x? Well, if you read the directions, that's not what I ask you to do. I ask you to just use the commutative property. And all the commutative property means is to move. So this would be your answer. 5 plus x. You're just switching their order. You're just moving them around. Yeah. But if you don't read your directions, you're going to try and solve for x, and that doesn't make sense. Okay, what about the next one? 3 times x?
X times 3.
X times 3. Very simple.
8 times x.
Next one is 8x. Good. And last?
X plus 17.
X plus 17. So again, if you read the directions, this is very, very simple. You just are moving, because that's what commute means. It means to move. Okay? What about the next one? Associative property. So what is the root word of the word associative?
Associate.
Associate. So if I ask you, who do you associate with? What does that mean?
So use the same connected to?
Who are you connected to? Right. Who are you friends with? Who do you group with? So what this means is if you're adding or multiplying, again, adding or multiplying, it doesn't matter how you group them. It doesn't matter who is associated with who. In the end, you're just going to combine everything. So it doesn't matter if I group or connect A and B, or if I group or connect B and C. That doesn't matter, because in the end, you're going to just add everything together. Same thing with multiplication. So all the associative property means is move the parentheses. Move the parentheses. So here we have the parentheses around 4 and 6, but it says to regroup. It says reassociate. So we're going to take those parentheses and just bounce them over. We're not changing any order. We're just moving our parentheses. Okay?
So you would put the parentheses in 5 plus 4 and then plus 6.
Yep, plus 6 would be outside. So parentheses 5 plus 4, and then the plus 6 would be outside. Okay, we'll see on the next slide why we do this, and why we do this is so we can group all the numbers together so we can combine those. Okay, use the associative property. That means regroup. That means bounce the parentheses, so that negative 1 is outside, and the 2 times 5 is inside. One thing to point out on this, it does not say simplify on these. So I don't want the answer of 15 on this. I just want to see you change it. I don't care about the answer on this one.
So I'll just say use the associative property.
Yeah, if it says use the associative property to simplify, that's different. And we'll do that on the next slide.
Yeah, that's what this one is.
Okay, next one is just 2 outside, and then we regroup the 9 plus 7. Okay, so again, we don't want the answer on that. We just want to regroup. The next one does say simplify, though. So we want to use the associative and commutative property. So we want to move and regroup in order to simplify. Simplify meaning combine what we're allowed to combine. So how we do that is we get all the numbers next to each other. Okay?
I know how to do this.
So what we do first is we switch the stuff in parentheses. We use the commutative property to switch the order in the parentheses. So 12 plus x. And above that I'm going to write a C, so you know that that was the commutative property. All I did was switch that order. Now we've got all the numbers next to each other, so now let's just regroup so that the numbers are connected to each other.
The answer is negative 22 is x.
Where'd you get... We're not looking for an answer.
Couldn't you do that though?
We're just looking for simplification.
Because
There's no equals. It doesn't equal 0.
But you could add like -10 to each side.
But where's each side? There's only one side.
There's an equal sign.
There's not an equal sign, really. This doesn't equal 0. If it equaled 0, then yes, you would be right, -22. But all we're doing is just combining our terms. So you just went one step too far. Because we can't figure out what x is unless it's an equation. Right now it's an expression. Remember that? The difference between those? So it is an expression because we don't have an equal sign where it equals something. We're just simplifying. Okay, so we see what we did there? We got our numbers next to each other, and then we associated those friends, those ones that go together, and then we combined those to get 22. So on the next one, are our numbers next to each other?
Yes.
The numbers are already next to each other, so we don't need to move anything. We just need to reassociate. We just need to group the friends together, the like terms together. So 3 times 7 in parentheses, and then the x outside. So that equals a -21x. And all that was the associative property. Okay, do that last one. So we want to get the numbers next to each other. So we might need to move stuff first and then group those numbers together. Yeah.
Would it be x plus in parentheses 5 plus 9? No, yeah.
Then you could simplify. Because remember, the whole reason to get them together is because you can combine them. Okay, so our commutative property allows us to switch the order of what is in the parentheses. Plus 9, so that's commutative. Okay, then we have the numbers near each other, so let's just group them together. So now we have 5 plus 9 in parentheses. And that's the associative property because we moved, we reassociated, and now we can just combine what can be combined. So x plus 14. Okay, so that's the associative and commutative property. Just make sure to read the directions. If they want you to simplify, simplify. If they don't want you to simplify, don't simplify. Okay?
Chances Eva comes in at the last minute of the class.
It could happen. Alright, next thing, the distributive property.
Our class is just
So if I came in here and I distributed $100 to each of you, what does that mean?
It means you gave out,
Hand out to everyone or just some of you? If I distributed. Everyone. Okay? So that's the same thing with the distributive property. You have to be fair. You have to give it to every single part. If you remember last year, you probably dealt with something that looked a little like this.
Oh yeah, you read it.
The red arrows. Okay? But the first thing we want to do is chunka, or chunka-dunka. Okay? But that is the distributive property. You have to give it to every part. A very common mistake is only giving it to the first one. You have to give it to every part. If I gave $100 to everyone in here, except one of you, so except Jack, I didn't give Jack any money, that wouldn't be fair, right? He'd be pretty mad at me.
Well, he was late.
And he teaches me. He would make help for his friend.
Okay, so 5 times x, can I multiply a letter times a number?
Yeah, you can do 5.
Right, so we can't really multiply those together, so instead we just write them next to each other. So 5x. Same thing with the y, and that y is negative, so negative 5y. And then something that makes it a little harder to enter stuff into my math lab. My math lab does not like plus and negative, so we're going to change that back into the minus sign. So instead of plus and negative, we're going to write down 5x minus 5y. And that is our answer. Okay, that's the distributive property. So on the next one, let's do our chunka-dunka. And distribute. Remember, when you distribute, you can do numbers times numbers and letters times letters. And I'm saying that because later we'll see it in a lot harder way. So that 2 times 3 is 6, and that x just hangs out next to it. Then that 2 times negative 4 turns into a negative 8, and that y just stays there because the 2 doesn't have a y to deal with anything else. Then next, that 2 times a negative z ends up being a negative 2z. So there is your answer. This time I did not do this step. Okay, if you need to write this step before changing it back to a minus, you can do that. I just went ahead and didn't write my plus signs. I just put negative 8 and negative 2 instead. Okay, last, what are we going to distribute on this one? What is immediately outside of that parentheses?
Negative.
A negative what? A negative 1 is hidden out there. Okay? So you can distribute a negative 1 to each piece of this.
That will just, you just have to flip everything to negative.
That's the other thing that I was about to say, right? We learned a couple classes ago, if there's a negative immediately outside of grouping symbols, all that means is everything inside becomes its opposite, right? There was a slide that literally just said the opposite of on the top, because that's all that means. So everything inside becomes its opposite. Negative x, positive 7, negative 2s. So that's the opposite of. Okay, this last slide, you don't even have to write anything down. If you want to, you can write something down. I'm just going to explain it to you, though. If you want to write it down just to remember it, you can. All right. So, identity properties just means their identity does not change. Okay? The identity is what it originally was. So the addition property of identity means what do I add in order for the identity to not change. For addition, if you add 0, it doesn't change. And you can also do the commutative property of that. 0 plus a still equals a. So for addition, the identity doesn't change when you add a 0. For multiplication, if you multiply times 1, the identity doesn't change.
If you do 0, then it does change because it changes.
Right, so the identity property of multiplication is 1, not 0. Because if you multiply times 0, then yes, it does change. It changes to a 0. Same thing here. If you added 1, that's obviously going to change. So the identity and multiplication ones are different, which is the only time on this entire lesson that the addition and multiplication are different. The rest of the times, it's the same property the whole time. Okay, so that's the identity property. It just means the beginning amount doesn't change. What do I add for the beginning amount not to change, and what do I multiply for the amount not to change? Okay, and that is the end of the lesson. You have 25 minutes to get your homework done, or do quiz. You got a long time.